The Name 1, Part 4 of 4. We speak of ideograms or ideography. What does this mean? What we always see, every time that this etiquette of ideograms can be brought in, is something that presents itself as being, in effect, very close to an image, but becomes an ideogram to the extent that it loses, that it increasingly effaces this feature of being an image. It is as such with the birth of cuneiform writing. It is, for example, an arm or the head of an ibex, as from a certain moment onwards it takes on a certain aspect, for example, like this one for the arm. Meaning that nothing of the original is recognizable. That the transitions exist there have no other effect than to comfort us in our position, i.e., that what is created, at whatever level that we see writing emerge, is a baggage, a collection of things that one does not have the right to call abstract, in the sense that we use the term these days when we are speaking about abstract painting, for these are in effect etched scores that come from something that in its essence is figurative, and it's for that reason that it is believed to be an ideogram. But it is a figurative representation that has been effaced. Let's push forward the word that necessarily comes to mind for us here: repressed or even rejected. What is left is something in the order of this unary mark, and it is insofar as it functions as distinctive that it happens to play the role of a mark. As you know or don't know, it doesn't matter, at Madazil, the other site rifled through by Piet, who I mentioned the other day, stones were found, pebbles on which you can see things like this, for example. This would be in red, for example, on quite a pretty kind of pebbles, faded greenish. On another one you can see this outright, which is all the neater as this sign is the sign that is used in set theory to designate the belonging of an element. And there is another one. When you look at it from a distance, it's a die. You can see 5 points. On another side you see 2 points. When you look at the other side, there are again 2 points. It is not a die like ours, and if you ask the curator who opens the case for you, you will see that on the other side of the 5 there is a bar, a line, a 1. Hence it is not exactly a die, but from the impression it gives you at first sight, you would have thought that it is a die. In the final analysis, you would not be wrong, for it is clear that a collection of this kind, of movable characters, to call them by their name, is in any case something that has a signifying function. You will never know what it was used for, if it was a way of drawing lots, if these were objects for exchanging, tesserae to be precise, objects of acknowledgement, or if it served as whatever you could elucidate on a mystical theme. That changes nothing in relation to the fact that what you have here are signifiers. That the aforementioned Piet managed to induce Salomon Reinach, as a result of all that, into raving that this says anything about the archaic and primordial character of Western civilization, because it could supposedly have been already an alphabet, is another story. But this is to be interpreted like a symptom, but also to be critiqued in relation to its actual implications. That nothing, of course, allows us to speak of archaic writing in the sense that this could have been used, these movable characters, to do some kind of printing in the caves. That is not what it is about. What it is about is that insofar as such an ideogram means something, to take the little cuneiform character that I made for you earlier, this one, at the level of a stage much more primitive than Akkadian writing, designating the heavens, it turns out that this is pronounced an. The subject who looks at this ideogram calls it an, as representing the heavens. But what will happen as a result of this is that the position gets reversed, that from this moment on, in a syllabic kind of writing, what gets used to portray the syllable an will no longer have any relationship with the heavens. All ideographic systems of writing, or so-called ideographic systems of writing, without exception, simultaneously carry the trace of this use that is called ideographic with what is called the phonetic usage of the same material. But what has not been articulated, what has not been properly highlighted, what no one seems to me to have fully taken into account up until now is this. It's that everything happens as if with written signifiers already having been produced as distinctive marks. And we have historical proof of this, for someone called Sir Flinders Petrie showed that, well before the birth of hieroglyphic characters, on the examples of pottery that remain to us of what is called the pre-dynastic period, we find, as marks on the pottery, just about all the forms that have been found to be used later, i.e. after a long historical evolution in the Greek, Etruscan, Latin, Phoenician, everything to do with what is of the highest interest to us as the characteristics of writing. You can see where I'm going with this. Even though in the final analysis the admirable thing the Phoenicians did first and then the Greeks, i.e. this thing that allows for an exact as possible notation of the functions of the phoneme with the aid of writing, it's from completely the opposite perspective that we must see what it concerns with writing as material, as baggage that was waiting there, following a certain development that I will come back to, that of the formation of the brand, we would say, which today incarnates this signifier that I'm talking about. Writing was waiting there to be phoneticized, and it is to the extent that it is vocalized, phoneticized like other objects, that it learns, writing if I may say so, to function as writing. If you read this work on the history of writing, you will find on every page the confirmation of what I am giving you as a schema on it. For every time there is some progress in writing, it is insofar as a population has attempted to symbolize their own language, their own form of phonetic articulation, with the help of a written material borrowed from another population, and one that only appeared to be well adapted to another language, for it was no better adapted, it was never easily adaptable, of course, for what relationship is there between writing and this modulated and complex thing that is an articulated utterance? But that had been adapted by the very fact of the interaction that there is between a certain material and the usage one gives it in another form of a language, of phonetics, of syntax, whatever you like, meaning that, at the beginning, it was apparently the least appropriate instrument for what was to be done with it. It happens thus with the transmission of what is initially forged by the Sumerians, meaning before it gets to the point that we are at, and when it is taken up by the Akkadians, all the difficulties come from the way this material fits very badly with the phoneticization that must be entered into, but, on the contrary, once it has been entered into, it influences the whole appearance of it, something I will come back to. To put it another way, what the advent of writing represents is this, that something that is already writing, if we consider the signifying mark in isolation to be the key characteristic, being named, comes to be able to serve as the bearer of this infamous sound on which Mr. Gardner puts all the emphasis concerning proper nouns. What is the result of this? As a result of this, we must find, if my hypothesis is correct, something that demonstrates its validity. There isn't only one, they start swarming once we start thinking about it, and they are so accessible, so obvious, it's what I'm going to give you straight away, i.e. one of the characteristics of the proper noun, I will of course come back to it, you will see all over and under in 1,000 forms, 1,000 illustrations of it, is that the key characteristic of proper nouns is always more or less linked to this hyphenating mark, not to sound, but to writing. And one thing that proves it, what I want to highlight today above all else, is this. It's that when we have indecipherable written material, because we don't know the language that is being incarnated, we are stuck. If we have to wait until we have a bilingual inscription, and that doesn't go much further if we know nothing at all about the nature of its language, i.e. its phonation. What do we look for if we are cryptologists and linguists? We try to discern in this undeciphered text something that could be a proper noun, because there is this dimension, which it is astonishing that Mr. Gardner does not make reference to. He who all the same has as the trail-blazing inaugural leader of his science Champollion, and that he does not recollect that it was with Cleopatra and Ptolemy that the whole deciphering of Egyptian hieroglyphs began. Because in all languages, Cleopatra is Cleopatra and Ptolemy is Ptolemy. What distinguishes a proper noun, despite the appearance of small modifications one calls colon, cologne, is that from one language to another it keeps its structure, its sonic structure no doubt, but this sonic structure is distinguished by the fact that precisely this one, amongst others, we must respect it, and precisely because of the affinity of the proper noun with the mark, the direct apposition of a signifier onto a certain object. And there we are, apparently falling back in the most brutal way into the word for the particular in English. Does that then mean that I agree with Mr. Bertrand Russell on this? As you know, certainly not. For in the meantime, the whole question of precisely the birth of the signifier has arisen, from that of which it is the sign. What does it mean? It is here that a function gets inserted, which is of the subject, not of the subject in the psychological sense, but of the subject in its structural sense. How can we, with what algorithm can we, as it is a question of formalization, place this subject? Do we have, in the order of the signifier, a means of representation regarding the genesis, the birth, the emergence of the signifier itself? This is what my discourse is heading towards, and I will take it up again in the new year.